The CW Chronicles. Sinners. Written by Silvano Williams. All content copyright 2013-2023. All rights reserved. Chapter 2. Villain. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? These are some of the questions we have asked since the moment we became aware of our own consciousness. There are many unexplained things in the cosmos, and the answers to these questions are irrelevant. There is no clear answer to them on a personal or individual level. Unless you are a chosen one, there is no singular meaning to our existence. We are all part of something much bigger than ourselves, bigger than our own points of view. We are here to make sure life continues in some way or another, until it evolves into something new. The one thing we have been able to figure out is that what we call life is a combination of two energy forces that are essential to sustain reality. Similar to how space-time is the fabric of time and space, the life force and the mind's energy are the fabric of existence. These forces are what keeps the cosmos from total entropy, and for reality to thrive there must be balance. Ever since the inception of the life force, there has been an evolution of the mind's energy. As is typical in a symbiotic relationship, one complements the other, and without each, their existence is incomplete. Life. Its paths paved by the mind's demands, forces the physical host to adapt and fulfill its needs, by evolving the body into a better vessel that can nourish and expand the various stages of consciousness. The mind. Its consciousness ranging from plant behavior to animal instinct, and from self-awareness to cosmic empathy, embarks on journeys that take it from self-discovery and the explanation of its own identity, onto the farthest reaches of existence. The mind is driven to explore beyond physical boundaries, in search of life with a consciousness like its own. The mind's final goal, its peak evolutionary step, is to meld with the cosmic source of life, allowing both forces to exist without the need of a physical host. It is believed this is how gods, or as they call them in the Weirdiverse, the cherubs, are created. The evolutionary steps of the life and mind forces create distinct stages of existence, each with attributes of power relative to their proximity to godhood. Champions are imbued with this power. CW and Villain are the champions of the Weirdiverse. Two champions, one for order and one for chaos, consecrated by the cherubs to battle for the chance to create their own dimension. But sometimes the evolution process is interrupted. Or worse, destroyed. In an unexplored part of an infant dimension, exists a galaxy characterized by its chaotic and still unformed solar system. Within them, amid a marbles game with planetary space rocks, the largest of the solid planets was the unwilling host to Villain's space armada. The only signs of life on this desolate planet came from an extensive compound of precariously built hangars. Fires, sparks, and flickering lights from within lit the otherwise darkened buildings. Inside, thousands of spacecraft were subjected to mechanical work and repairs. The noise coming from the derelict complexes battled against the dying planet's hostile atmosphere. The roaring winds ravaged the planet's rocky surface. Their force threatened to tear the structures away. Weepings of sorrow and exclamations of lament could be heard within the thunderous turmoil of the winds. A deafening orchestra that echoed the last cries of this planet's life force. Just outside the buildings, a dark and muscle-bound figure stood at the edge of a precipice. It was Villain. Villain was the embodiment of every drop of hate, wrongful doing and selfish act in the Weirdiverse. He was the walking manifestation of death and destruction, and most who had tried to oppose him had eventually met their demise. He looked past the chaotic vista. Unbothered by his surroundings, standing like a statue rooted deep within the soil, he became indifferent to the fierce winds that threatened to push him down the cliff's edge just inches in front of him. Rocks bounced and shattered against his skin. Dust and dirt swirled around him, avoiding him as if they recognized his power. Both his waist cape and the long mane of blonde hair that came out of the top of his executioner's mask flapped furiously with the planet's dying breaths. His presence exuded tension, a drowning shadow more menacing than the cacophony of suffering that surrounded him. The destruction of this planet was his doing. In the valley below, rivers of lava consumed the remains of the land. Occasional eruptions briefly illuminated the blackened landscape in fiery howls. Any chances for life to return to this planet were extinguished permanently. This was Villain's testament. Nonetheless, Villain felt nothing. Inside him there was no fear, no happiness, and no sense of fulfillment or satisfaction. There was only a feeling of suppressed anger waiting like a hungry beast to strike out against everything. Villain's mind was doubtless calm, calculating, and ruthless, yet logical. Only the strong deserved to survive, and no one was stronger than he was. The obliteration of life in the cosmos was the sole thought which motivated him. Total entropy was his only goal. Villain turned his attention from the sea of destruction to his gloved left hand, where he held a small skull. It was the skull of a humanoid large-eyed creature not from this planet. It was a froggy's skull. He twirled it around between his fingers effortlessly, uncaring of its fragility. He then stopped playing with it and brought it closer to his hooded face, letting out a deep throaty breath. It was deep and low, an angry exhalation from someone who knew true hate. His mask's red goggles reflected the grim image of the deceased skull, with the dim firelight from the lava below dancing in the background.
Why did I not remember this before?
His voice, just a whispered snarl, drowned the winds and canceled all the noise around him. The power of his voice resonated out of his hooded head. His mask filtered his voice's unnatural loudness. Villain spoke with a tone of godly condescension that commanded fear. It made those who heard it dread the prospect of an instantaneous and gruesome death.
You, a clearly useless waste of space, will serve a purpose after all, won't you?
He said to the skull, as he turned to walk toward the hangars where the clanging sounds of heavy machinery and hammered metal beaten into new shapes grew louder. Villain stood at the entrance of the building and looked up to study the structure. The winds and nearby lava explosions threatened to bring the walls down at any moment. He felt no concern. The noises from the laborers reverberated through the walls, the moans of those doing heavy construction work. Only once did it rise to shouts and hollering from an individual who stood on top of one of the machines to convince the others around to challenge their servitude. The clatter of metal crashing on the stone floors quickly interrupted the effort, as many of the workers rushed to silence the potential usurper with brutal and lethal force. Villain entered the building and walked into a small room, showing no interest in the failed coup. Inside the room, he clicked buttons on a console that energized a screen to materialize in midair. A rectangular screen of energy, with sparkling violet light around its edges, appeared in front of him. Villain grabbed the floating screen by the sparkling border and brought it slightly closer to his masked face. The screen obediently repositioned itself. He then looked down at the skull in his hand, pointing the small skull's empty eye sockets toward his own.
To think,
he said to it as he typed with one hand on the screen.
I almost showed a sign of pity by ignoring your pathetic survival.
The screen emanated lights of changing colors as it displayed several scrolls of information. Villain brought the skull up close to his mask and typed faster into the screen.
You will not be ignored any longer, and you will like that, won't you?
He mused, tapping the cranium with his index finger as if knocking the ash off a cigarette. Dust particles from it crackled with static when they passed through the floating monitor screen.
Yes, you will, because that is the purpose of your existence,
Villain said, changing his attention from the skull and back to the monitor. He typed into the interface once again. An image of a planet rendered on the screen. Text rapidly scrolled in small windows around the planet, and several red button icons pinpointed locations around it. He raised his open hand to the screen and slid his fingertips across it to push and activate all the buttons.
Slaves.
His thundering voice silenced the workers outside, all stopping what they were doing at once.
Ready the armada.
All the workers dropped whatever they had in their hands and shuffled into their ships. The roar of thousands of engines coming to life replaced the relative and short-lived silence. The sound was so loud it drowned the winds and echoed all over the planet. The smaller buildings outside of Villain's hangar began to vibrate and collapse. Yet he remained, his attention focused on the skull in his hand. He brought it up to his mask to speak to it face to face.
Of all the planets we have destroyed,
Villain said, his voice easily heard over the tumultuous noise around him.
Yours will be the easiest to conquer, and the most rewarding.
He paused and leaned the skull slightly sideways. Something about it made Villain tremendously irritated.
How could I have missed this before? I should have remembered,
he shouted, and with a growl of anger he crushed the small skull with his hand, shattering it with such explosive force pieces ricocheted off the walls all around him. He then punched the console, smashing it to half its size. The floating screen flickered and disappeared. Villain then kicked the damaged console through the wall. It crashed outside on the dilapidated building's floor, shattering into pieces at the feet of a handful of slaves who had stayed behind and were waiting for him just outside of his room. He stomped out of the room and marched past them, pointing to other workers who had not boarded a transport yet. This prompted the slaves to viciously attack the workers. The slaves growled as they tore into their target's skins with sharp claws, and even with their tools, easily mauling the defenseless victims. Ignoring the shrieks of pain, Villain sauntered toward his ship. It was a fighter spacecraft, designed for a single rider with a cargo area on the back. It hid in the shadows, cloaked in darkness, none of its markings visible. He walked to the back of it and put his hand on the cargo door.
"Soon, I will set you free again,"
he said in what could have been confused as a solemn tone. Something inside the cargo space scurried and made a gurgling noise, which caused Villain to pull his hand back rapidly. As he did so, he noticed a small pool of dark liquid vaporizing on the ground underneath. He stepped away from the putrid-looking puddle in disgust, and with a huff of anger, he jumped into the air and into the ship's cockpit. Villain flew his fighter out of the building and past the Space Armada fleet hovering outside, waiting for him. As soon as Villain passed them, the Armada revved up their engines to follow him. The thrust from their propulsion shook the remaining walls of the large building right off the foundation, finally allowing the angry atmosphere to begin the cleansing of the artificial scabs on its dead planet's surface. The ferocious winds covered the area with rocks and dirt, consuming the evidence of the collapsed buildings in blankets of black dust as the Space Armada zoomed away and disappeared into space.